Now that I've casted the most prominent X-Men in the last 4 videos, these are kind of like the icing on the cake. I wasn't sure if I was going to even include these, but I had a cast for them, so I thought any fans of these characters out there would like to see it. I know a couple people were frustrated with me mixing up Scott and Alex Summers in the last video, and that is completely my fault. Honestly, if I went by my memories, I really remembered Havoc being younger, but I thought I'd fact check it, and I came across this first result on Google. Since it's been years since I've read the comics, I kinda took it at face value, and I didn't look into it any further. I changed my casting, but little did I know the article was actually about the films, who changed the past of the brothers. I hope it didn't ruin the video for you, and I apologize to those Havoc fans out there. Although I still feel like Jensen Ackles would work well in the role, since he still looks youthful. If you really want to go younger, I feel like Alex Pettyfer would work well in the role. He looks like he could be the younger brother of Armie Hammer's Cyclops, and he has a similar vibe to Jensen. He could pull off the character dynamic very well.
I also could do some nice, fun.
What?
What?
What'd you say?
What'd you hear?
He's also 30 years old, which works really well with Armie Hammer being 33. So Alex Pettyfer as Havoc. Now that that's out of the way, we can really focus on our 2000s team. Now for the 2000s, the recruits to the X-Men team, there are a ton of them, and I mean a ton. I chose the ones I had a connection to, and the ones that I think would work well on screen, and their story would work well on screen. I know I missed a ton, because there's a lot I overlooked, even personal favorite ones like Chamber, but these are the ones that I feel would work best in the MCU and their story. As I mentioned before, this is recasting in the MCU, meaning that any actor who has been previously in MCU movies, they're off the table. But today we're talking about the 2000s recruits. I'm talking about Warpath, Armor, Cable, and X-23. So without further ado, let's recast the X-Men. First up we have Warpath. Now Warpath has made his way on screen very briefly in Days of Future Past, but much like Bishop, we didn't really get a chance for the character to shine and show what makes him special. Now I think it would be really interesting to see this character in the same dynamic as the comics. Originally, his brother, who was a member of the X-Men, died, which caused Warpath to think it was actually the X-Men's fault. He started out as a villain, and he shared his brother's name, but he eventually changed his views and became Warpath. It could make for a really interesting side story in a movie. I would like to see that revenge-driven version of this character, and see him become a team member by the end of it. Although we didn't see enough of Boo Boo Stewart's version of the character to really judge him, he always seemed too little and skinny for the role. It really didn't fit my vision of the character in my mind. So it's important we have someone who has a dominating frame and can really hold their own. I would also really like to see a real Native American in the role as well. I went with Martin Sensmar, who has really stood out in recent years. He was in the criminally underseen Wind River, as also he donned the Native role in Magnificent Seven. He's really starting to make a name for himself, and it'd really be awesome to see him in a comic book role. He's 6'1", jacked, and can really act. He isn't just someone who can fit the physical demands of the role, but the emotional as well with a lost brother.
Is she saying a white guy?
You just said was. Why did you say was? Why did she say was? She just said was!
Because I found her raped and killed right over there, son.
No.
So Martin Sensmar as Warpath. Next up we have Armor. Yes, not a classic X-Men character, but one of my favorites from Joss Whedon's run with the Astonishing X-Men. I really like this run of comics, and I would love to see Armor included in some way. She's not your typical character either. That's what makes me like her so much. She's a tiny 13-year-old girl who can become the tank of the team. She can create an extremely strong suit of armor, which is like a force field around her, and it kind of gives her super strength. I like the ironic nature of this character, but the character as well. She's a character with growth, an interesting story. I want to see her as that loud 13-year-old girl who is overly vocal. When casting a character this young, there aren't very many choices, but Peyton Elizabeth Lee can knock this out of the park. She is a Disney kid, but that isn't a bad thing. A lot of child actors got their start there and have turned into wonderful performers. She's most well known for Andy Mack, and although I haven't seen everything she's in, she almost seems too good for Disney. She has an interesting look and she does it incredibly well in scenes even though she's so young.
Checked in. Arcadia takes roll. She checked me in so I could go with Bellagio to get the new iPhone. I have a receipt if you want to see it.
Bellagio?
My boyfriend.
And all these wacky little names I'd fit right in.
Who are you? I've had a shrink since I was 6 and you don't act like a shrink.
Hey, Lissa. Just saw Paula book her Hannah French. We're late again.
how many people want to hassle me today.
So Peyton Elizabeth Lee as Armor. Next up we have X-23. Now much like Wolverine, I'd prefer if X-23 remained on the sideline for just a little bit. I really love what they did with the character in Logan. X-23 was always supposed to be the first successful clone of Wolverine, but it's later revealed that she's actually the genetic daughter. So it's important that she looks something like the Wolverine that I've casted. And if we do see her on screen inside the MCU, I'd like to see a slightly older version. I like Daphne Keene's portrayal, but they leaned very heavily into a child killer aspect. That slightly older version with more of a teenager vibe might provide a character who struggles with their decisions and actions, and the idea of being a perfect weapon. It will give us a slightly different edge to this character than we previously saw. Now, finding a young teenager who has shown what she can do and be feral and rage-infused as much as Wolverine is a tough ask. But if you've seen the Hannah TV series before, Esmeen Creed Miles has done just that. She's an incredibly talented young actress who's been killing it in that TV series. In Hannah, she shows everything that X-23 should be. She can portray that coldness with some warmth when needed. She really makes you buy into her being a killer that won't think twice, but brings depth to the character, all with looks and minimal dialogue.
Because you're the best thing in my life. You're the only thing in mine.
So Esmeen Creed Miles as X-23. Lastly, we have Cable. Now, this is kind of just for fun, because Disney is keeping Deadpool, and they will likely keep Cable intact as well. That being said, there is an off chance that Cable could appear outside the continuity and in the MCU, which might require recasting. I mean, honestly, he could get recast in Deadpool, and there'd just be a throwaway joke about him looking like Thanos before. Either way, let's have some fun and see someone who can play this time-traveling mutant. Now Cable, as we saw in Josh Brolin's portrayal, is grim, no nonsense, and carries a ton of backstory with him. When we see him in the past, he's a seasoned, older weapon. He's very much a soldier. He is in fact the son of Cyclops, so that'd really bring an interesting dynamic into the MCU as well. I like Josh Brolin in pretty much every role, and he does a great job as Cable, but in my opinion, he doesn't really look the part. He did an amazing job with Thanos, but when he appears in his normal body, the man is 5'8" on screen, and although he's jacked, I don't think he's the right kind of jacked. Cable is a massive man in the comics, and he's built like a boulder. He's supposed to be 6'8" and 350 pounds. He also needs that grumbly, don't give a shit kind of voice. Now, I know a ton of fan casting has been done for this character, and although I can see some in the role like Stephen Lang, there has always been one actor who I feel can knock Cable out of the park. That man is Ron Perlman. He has the height, the build, and the acting ability to play this role. Even if you look at him in Hellboy, you'll see a similar performance that we need for Cable, just with makeup on.
Stop it! Right now. Or what? Are you threatening me? Temper. It gets the best of you. Makes you weak. Makes you vulnerable.
He is older, probably older than the MCU would like for this role, but Cable isn't supposed to be young in the comics. And if he's in a one-off film, which I could totally see happening, he'd work extremely well. He has the build, and he could get into even better shape, and just listen to that voice.
Let me get something straight, Rev. Some Jew gets nailed to a cross like, 1,000 who gives a shit years ago. And he's gonna be the magic pill that pulls all of us scumbags to happiness, freedom.
Yes, it will, my brother.
Wow.
I think he'd do really well in the role, and I'd be really interested to see him as Cable. So Ron Perlman as Cable. So what do you think of my casting decisions? Check back next week for the Brotherhood of Mutants, and as always, let me know your picks in the comments below. I always love reading them. As always, thank you to my patrons Adam Gray, Jeremy Jacobs, Jenny Edwards, Gamer Chandra, Gunnar Lakeland, Colin West, Marco Perry, Roland, Aiden Exchange, Shalon Hudson, Kieran Hunt, George Conan, Brandon Warner, Sweevy, Alex Tal, Derek B. Bell, Jacob Wolf, Alexander Gardulo, Lisa Hewer, Rachel Kilker, and James Rogers. Thank you for your support, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.